Rabbi Isai, welcome back to Yerushalmi Maasrot. We are holding Daf Dalet of Aleph. Kol Adumin, is that where we are? Yeah, all the fruits the sort of reddish fruit. So the time of their Maasrot is Mishiadimu, when the fruit turns red. Meyasha Tani, we learned in the Brisa. Meyasha learned in the Brisa. Rima and Shanik Rabbi, Afila Pareda Achas. A bird has made a hole in even one little seed of it. Kula chibol masa. It's a sign that it's got a share of ripeness, a share for the Odas Maasrot. Since one part of it is ripe, the whole thing is considered ripe, and as if it's reached the stage that you can take Maasrot of it. Similarly, Eshkol, a cluster of grapes, Shabishaba Filu Gage Yechidi, that there's, let's say, one grape now that's ripened, Kula chibol masa, all of it as if its whole thing is ripened. Rabbi Hanina said, Pashtu Hulam, Miyasha, he explained the Brisa, not only the cluster that is considered Odas Maasrot, but Kol Isa HaGefen, that whole vine that cluster is on, and Kol Isa Hamin, and the whole type of the grapes. Let's say they're all red, all green, all the green grapes, even though they are in another vine near this vine, as if they reached the Odas Maasrot. Chaza Pashul, and after that he said it again. He said Kol Isa Ruach, all those on that side of the vineyard. And even another type, if it's outside of the vineyard, are considered reached Odas Maasrot. Rabbi Yosef Buddha, he says, Kol Isa Kereb, all the grapes in that vineyard, even on another side, have reached Odas Maasrot because of that one grape that's ripened. Now, what about Kerem Cotton Vasa Gadol? Now, a typical Yerushalmi question. This Rabbi says, you know how Yerushalmi likes asking questions. Imagine you bought a vineyard near to this vine, or you had a small one and you made it big. So you had a small one at the time when you find this thing right, but now you bought a bigger vineyard. Or Gadol Vasakad, you had a big one, you made it small, you sold a bit of it. Or you had Echad Vasashnaim, you had one vineyard, and you sort of divided it in the middle with a wall. Or Shnaim, you had two vineyards where there was a wall separating, Vasa Echad, and you removed the wall, so now it's one vineyard. Do we follow what was in the vineyard from the beginning? And if you added a bit more, you made two from one, the grapes in the new area are not connected to say that they've reached a stage of Maasrot, and we don't say they've reached Odas Maasrot because of one grape in one part of the vineyard, and the other way round. The grapes in the part that you sold, or you divided into another vineyard, maybe they're still chibur, they've reached, all the grapes have reached in both parts of Odas Maasrot because of one grape that ripened wherever it was. Or do we follow the situation now, and that the grapes in the new area are still chibur for Odas Maasrot, but those that grow in a part that you've separated across are not a chibur for Maasrot. You see that? So the fact that you've separated another area and given it to someone else, maybe the grapes in that area are now not considered Odas Maasrot. Right? Typical Yerushalmi question there, as any. And the answer is we have no answer. Now, the fruit is considered a chibur as far as Odas Maasrot. There's another din about that you can't eat it before because of sakana sometimes. If you find holes in it, we're worried maybe there's venom from snakes. Shmuel Amar, the last shenik rabbi Saviha. You got your pumpkin that's got a hole where it grows, like where it's connected to the ground. Kol Isa Haguma Asura. All the ones in that patch, as it were, are forbidden. After machbados. Now, what about the clusters of dates of tomorrow? The din and cane, it's the same din. If you find one date has got this hole, then all the dates.
Is that because you're worried about a snake?
We're worried about venom, yeah. We're worried about venom. It's called mechabedes, okay, that's what it's called. It looks a bit like a broom, doesn't it? That's why it's called a broom, as it were, mechabedes. Okay. Rabbi Yossi. Shal Yedison ben Chasha ish genisar, the man of Genisar, he asked us from Gamliel, v'chacham b'yamne, nikure rete be'ived. You got dates that haven't fully ripened, and they've got holes while they're still connected to the tree. Mine. What's the deal? Amrali says, Kol Dekel also, the whole date palm over there is also, all the dates are forbidden. Maybe only, before we said only the ones on that cluster. The Brisa seems to forbid all the dates in the whole tree. Okay. Now, Rabbi Yonatan ben Chasha didn't talk about a case where there was just one date with a hole, because that would be poshet. That maybe they're all also have safek. Maybe the snake has made a hole in another date, in this tree. Maybe we can't tell all the holes are sealed up. We don't know. Maybe they're all forbidden. But the Gemara says, actually, Amr Rabbi Yossi, you know where he asked this question? B'shenikhu kulan. where you can see that all of them have got holes. Shalai time, I don't say, it's very unusual for snakes to make holes in all the fruit. So maybe it was a whole flock of birds that were there, right? And therefore they're permitted because the birds don't leave any venom behind, right? So he's not sure. Maybe we should allow all of them in this case because you can say it was the birds. And the Chacham said no, they're still forbidden. The dates that haven't fully ripened and you find them with holes while they're still connected to the tree, also they're forbidden. But a lot of people are just easygoing and they don't care. And they're not damaged. When the Rabbim are particular, when the Rabbim don't care, not to be careful from something which min adin you should worry about sakana, right? Then it's a case of Hashem guards them. On those who don't know to be careful, sometimes Hashem guards them. That's what we're saying here. So you can rely on it and eat it because the Rabbim are easygoing. The pomegranates reach a stage of Maisus Mishimasu. What does that mean? When the flesh around the pip sort of softens, Tachas Yadav under his hand and sort of juice comes out. When they reach half their growth. Rabbi Yoda boy, he asked, maybe from the Chachamim who talk in Agadata, he learned this. When the Jewish people talk about the words of the land, the Lashon Hara that they took out from the spies, literally like he softened our hearts. But it can be Palgun Levavenu, they halved our hearts. They broke our hearts into two. So Hemasa is an expression of halving things. And that's where you learn Mashimasu is talking about half the growth of the pomegranate. The dates when they sort of open up with cracks, like yeast which opens with cracks. He said when there's like a charitz, a groove to the length of the date, and it opens up because of the ripeness. Rabbi Yoda boy, what are we talking about here? If this groove has sort of opened up the whole date, novelty, then it's already so ripe. It's novelas. 1 minute. It's like it doesn't need to ripen so much to be reaching the stage of Oinos and Maasrot, right? If the whole thing's opened up, it's already novelas, and definitely, I think it's going too far. Basically, it doesn't need to go that far. And that the pit now can separate from the actual fruit from the inside, so it's not fully opened, but it's got some grooves on the outside because of its swelling. So that's a sign from the pip is no longer connected to the actual fruit. Then b'sheli hikasaka, but that's fully ripe. That's not what the Mishnah says, because Oinos and Maasrot is when the fruit starts to form, not when it's fully cooked. So therefore, the Gemara concludes the shear b'shatila sa'or is not when it's like the whole groove is there. It's an earlier stage in development. Rabbana de Kisvin Amri, they said the shear of the ripeness, which the Mishnah is talking about, b'shiyishtachem, when you put out the dates in the sun, they'll be good to eat. So when they start becoming fitting to eat, and even though they're not fully ripened, and that's what the Mishnah says, b'shiyatilu sa'or. That means when they start having these grooves at the beginning of their ripeness, like a dough that has crevices and so on when it starts to ferment. Hafasakin Mishiatilu Gidim. The peach. Hafasek is what? Is the peach or the pear? I always forget. Peach. The peach is when they bring out these sinews. Rav Zira V'Shem is Mishiatilu Gidim Adumim. They have sort of reddish strands. Now we had a Machlokes Tanakama Rabbi Yehuda. Oinos Maasrot of a geizim of nuts. The Tanakama holds when they become megura. Rabbi Yehuda said they make a shell. So the level of Maasrot, so geizim mashkedim mishiyasu megura. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, so that mishiyas megura, megura is basically the pip separates from the shell. It's like it's in a little storehouse. You understand? And that's a stage that you find with almonds as well. So it's like it's a development stage. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he says, geizim mashkedim, the nuts, the walnuts and the almonds, mishiyasu klipa, when they make an extra shell. Omra, they said, but klipa tachtoina, the lower shell, she's smuch aloich, which is next to the food, very thin shell. They greet him be'il sarin. Now, il sarin, there's light mentioned in the Pasha in Bereshis chapter 43. Pistakin. Pistakin is sort of the pistachios, etc., or peanuts of some kind. Some say pistak, the pistachios. Of Istrobilin, right? We don't really know what they are. So now with these, the maestros is Mishiasu Klippa when they develop this thin shell around the food. Acharuvin Mishian Kidu, the carobs. So we said all black things Mishian Kidu. I think Gemara says, what does it mean Mishian Kidu? It includes the carobs as well. They're also black when they ripen. This shir, Tani Reb Chiba Papa, Charuvin Mishil Shulan, when they are beginning to become heavy and then they're sort of hanging, Hu Chanatan. That is their development stage, as far as the Shnasa Masa is based on that stage in their growth. Okay, when they reach this size, fruit of the tree, you always follow the Chanata, right, the budding. But the Oinus Maestros is Mishian Kidu, as we're saying here. Mishian Kidu, which is a different stage. And all the black fruit could go in Inve Hadas, like the berries of the Hadas, but Inve Sneh and the other thornbush berries. Now, Mishian Kidu. Tani Ruchidna Bar Papa, Mishayasu Nakudas Shucharis. What does Mishian Kidu means? They develop black dots. Prishin, they are what? Quinces? Is that what they say? Prishin? Mishiach Kricha, they sort of balden a bit. They become bald. It's Galin, which is quinces. Why they call it? You're not going to get a fruit which is so ready to be cooked. You just can't eat it raw. You want to cook it. Except this fruit. The rest of the fruit, you might eat it raw, but this one you definitely will not. Any white fruit could go mapiyasa, like the fruit called mapiyasa, like a fruit which has got small hairs. When it's small, starts ripening, they fall off. Mishiakricha, when the hairs have fallen off. They have like bald white patches because all the hairs have fallen off. Shimei said, Maestros of this Mishiaschilu Mayim, when moisture falls like a juice from the fruits when you squeeze it. Also, story came before Chanina. Someone had this white fruit, and he cut them when they were still white in various places and bald in various places. He wanted a paskin lamaisa kuchidna ba papa that the Chaim Maisa when they reached the stage, but before he passed on that chazor, but then he said, it's not because of the ripening that they get to this stage. It's because of the worms maybe that they become like this. So they're not necessarily ripe. That's what he's saying. He wants to say, look, some of them were baldish in some places, and they've reached Eilos Maestros, but maybe all the fruits is like that. But after that he changed his mind. He said, no, although it's a sign of being ripe, but it's not necessarily the case. Maybe they ripened early because they were wormy. And they ripen before their time. They ripen prematurely when they're wormy. Okay. Hatiltam, which is your Fenu Greek, Mishatitzmach, or Chilba, if you want to call it that. Mishatitzmach, when it starts growing. Kinimasni, so this chapter Mishnah, the Maestros for Tiltam, Tizra Pesabach. You sow it and it grows. If you sow the seeds, they'll grow. How do you check to know if they're fitting to grow? You take a handful of these seeds, put it in a bowl of water. If the majority of it sinks, then you're chayav maestros. And if not, you're puzzle. So we understand it depends if most of it sinks or not. Rabbi Yoda boy, if that's the case, talk about like Rov Minyan, I mean, even if not most of it have not sunk, whatever sinks should be chayav maestros because they're fully ripe. What doesn't sink should be potter. Therefore, he explains, you have to say on the majority of every seed, this checking was said. So everything where most of each particular seed sinks, then that is ripe enough to grow. And the chayav maestros. Okay? That's the case. The majority of every pip, of every seed, this checking was discussed. Okay. Arav Zira. So the shir for tilton is when you sow it and it grows. See if it says Davashun Nizra Matzmiach, something that's sown that grows, is Chaim Ma'aseh Yasa, something as opposed to something that grows Pachos B'Shlish, less than a third, She'ena Nizra Sameach, and it will not be sown and start growing. So he's learning the drosha Zarecha. Rabbeinu Chanana learns the drosha is from Aseh to Aseh. The Bavli brings another source for idea of growing a third. It says, right, for 3 years. The shloish is if it's written for 3 years. So tzvua is considered made when it reaches a third of its growth. The Bnei Yeshua says, this is not machlokes Bavli Yerushalmi, because we don't like to have arguments Bavli and Yerushalmi. We try not to. And we discussed it on Monday, if you remember. He says the two droshes complement each other. The Yerushalmi we would have known is going to be fitting to grow. We wouldn't have known when you reach that stage. And from the two droshes together, we know it's going to be fitting to grow, and it's going to be growing a third. Okay. Where we? Rav Chidna b'shem Rebbe Zeisim Adam Shlai v'Yushlish. They've not grown a third. Af hamashkin yezman en machshirin. The liquids that come out are not mushur to receive tumah. Okay. So the Ashir Oidas Maestris is of olives when they grow a third. How do we know when you reach that stage? Rav Chia b'shem Rav Chanina Zeisim Me'em Zachos Maestris when the Chaim Yivaka Samya Kaita. When you start ripening certain fruits that grow in the summer, if this sort of fruit starts ripening, you know the olives have reached a third. Lo bika Samya Kaita. If this fruit called Samya Kaita is not yet ripened in that year, maybe you didn't have the right conditions for it, you can still work out the growth of the olives. Mishibikeru b'nai sheva, type of figs, good figs, when they ripen. Lai bikeru b'nai sheva, but what if you don't have those figs? How do we know when's the ripening for the olives? Mishiyoru marvia shniya shmugsa, when they start gathering the second collection of figs from the storehouse, where they store the figs to dry. The second time round, they start gathering them, that's the time. Now, Rav Lazar Yosef Shem Tanchum Achia, that which he said that these figs, the zimun, mishiyavakru b'nai sheva levanos, when these b'nai sheva levanos, so these white ones are ripening, not other types of figs. It's only this type will ripen at the time when the olives reach a third of their growth. Providing b'nai sheva shabayis in that place where the olives are growing. But B'nai Sheva in another place is not a raya for the olives in this place. Okay, so far so good? Right. Now, we spoke about the klal of kvias oidas ha'maisros. If it's not fitting to eat when it's small, you're not ha'maisros until it's fitting to eat. And if it is fitting to eat, whether it's small or big, then you're ha'maisros whether you gather it when it's small or whether you gather it when it's big. So now we're saying, when is the maisa, the time of maisros? It's fitting, until it grows. So let's see. But yerek, now what about vegetables? Hakishud madiloid, whereas the pumpkins, the courgettes, papatikh, the melons, and lafafine, and also fruits of the tree, tapuchim, the apples, esrogim. Hayavin, yochayv maestros, whether gedolim, whether they're big, ketani, or small, because they're fitting to eat. Shimon paita esrogim b'koitnan. Shimon paita is the esrogim because they are too small. Hachayv b'shkedim amorim. Now there are types of almonds. There are sweet ones and the bitter ones. There are differences in din between them. When it's liable with the bitter almonds, potter, you don't have to separate min hamasukin. You don't have to separate from the almonds which are sweet. If you're chayav with the sweet ones, potter min hamorim, you're potter from the bitter ones. The bitter ones, they become bitter and bitter. So you can only eat it when they're small, right, when they're still soft, and then they're chayav ma'aser. When they're much bigger, you can't eat it, they're too bitter. They're potter from Maaseh. But with the sweet almonds, it's the opposite. They're eaten when they're bigger and not when they're smaller. Because when they're bigger, they're nicer to eat. And when they're small, they're potter from Maaseh. And when they're bigger, they are chayav. Tamon Taninon. We've learnt. We're asking on the first din of the Mishnah. Tamon Taninon, Lakach Yerek. You buy fields of vegetables from a Nachri in Syria. If you bought it actually by Loidas Maestros, so the vegetables hadn't yet reached the stage of Maestros Chayiv, you have to take Maestros. If you took the field Mishabol Loidas Maestros, once the vegetables have reached Loidas Maestros, part of the potter, but locate Kedarkoi, and you can cut the vegetables normally, but like Keach, and you can take them you don't have to take Maisa from them, although they grew a bit after you bought them from the Rachri. Basically, what do we see from here? The Oinus Maasros is the vegetables is not starting as soon as they start growing, right? It's starting later on. Let's see this again. So Ad Shalai, you took them, you bought them. Ad Shalai Oinus Maasros, you're chayav to take Maisa. If you buy them after Oinus Maasros, you're patur. But locate, and you can gather them Kedaka v'lekeach, and you can gather them where it's needed. You don't have to take Maisa. But here we're saying that the vegetables are chayiv even when they're small, and the Oinus Maasros is as soon as they start growing. So Chizkiah Amar b'steishol kishum shadilonim asnisa. Mishnah there is talking about a field of kishuim, the kashets and pumpkins, that the fruit is eaten, not the leaves. Until you reach the stage of Maasros, it means the leaves have grown, but the fruits have not yet grown. And once you reach a stage of Maasros, it means the fruit has already come out. Harav zira, I feel a tema. You could even say we're talking about b'stei yerek atzmai, the field of the vegetable itself, the leaves basically, and it's eaten. Oidu yesh gvul. Even for this vegetable, there is a border as far as the beginning of Chib Maasros, and that is, when does that time start? Mishayavi shalosh basilis, when you have three small leaves growing, and they're long like a wick, and that's Oinus Maasros. And it's shaykh with the Mishnah say on them, there's a time they're not yet reached Oinus Maasros. Okay, apples and esrogim, chayav big and small. Rav Shimon paiter, Rav Shimon pater the esrogim that are small. Rav Shimon tapuche ketanim peturin. Small apples are pater. The big ones are chayav. Tapuche meli is type of small apples like gulnuts. Ben gedolim ben ketanim chayav. But big or small, they are liable. But Davas Nisa. Now this Mishnah that learns that the apples are chayav ma'aser, big or small. Who is it like? Is it everyone or is it Rav Shimon? So Mandam are the one who says the Mishnah of the apples is ketanim. They're talking about normal apples which are small. So the din of the Mishnah that the apples are chayav even when they're small is machlekes, right? Because Rav Shimon patters the normal apples when they're small, and the Mishnah learns the Chachamim who argue. Whereas Mandam the Mishnah one who says talking about tabuche meli mela, that we're talking about these very small ones like gulnuts, divra kol. That means according to everyone, even if Shimon agrees that these meli mela are chayav maasros even when they are small. I bring a brisa which learns machlekes in kashrus with the esrog, a small esrog for abar minim. We can learn for our machlekes. Esrog aboiser, it's like an early stage in its development. Rabbi Kiva he says ain't a pri, it's not considered a fruit, and you can't fully duty with it. Chacham in pri, the Chacham said you can. Rabbi Ila, Rabbi Yasa, Rabbi Elazar, Asid Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon who patters the smallest regim from Maasros is like Rishidus Rabbi Kiva Rabbi. Rabbi Kiva is teacher, who puzzles an early stage esrog for the mitzvah of sukkahs. Rabbi Kiva, but just like he said, an esrog of early stage baisa ain't a pri, it's not considered a fruit, and therefore it's possible for the mitzvah. Ken Rav Shimon, he also says ain't a pri, it's not considered a fruit, and you're not chayav maisa. Rabbi Yossi, kosher kosher. Now, do you honestly think that everything which is kosher for sukkahs, for lulav, chayav maasros, therefore it's chayav maasros? Do you think one depends on the other? He says, they ask, you got a spotted esrog, you imagine you have an esrog which is a square shape. Yeah? Right? It was growing in a square.
Oh, yeah.
So what's the din? Is it chayav maasros? Any offers? Of course it is. Can you use it for sukkahs? No, you can't. So there are obviously differences between maasros obligations and sukkah obligations. It grows in the form. Also, kikado, imagine an esrog which is made like a football. Puzzle lulav, they're all possible for a lulav, and yet chayav maasros, they are fitting to eat. So as long as it's possible for mitzvahs and tila, doesn't mean it's possible for maasros. So Mistabra, Rav Shimon yoda Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Kiva la yoda Rav Shimon. So Rav Shimon would agree to Rabbi Kiva, yoda Rabbi Kiva, that a small esrog is possible for lulav. It says peri, eitz hada, and a small one, or an unripened one, a pri, is not considered a fruit. Rabbi Kiva la yoda Rav Shimon, Rabbi Kiva would agree to Rav Shimon that an early developed one is part of a maasros, because menuma, a spotted esrog, Hare Gadab is forced, it grows in a form. Hare also kikado, made like a ball. Hare possible lulav, you cannot use it for lulav, and even so chayav maasros, you're still chayav maasros. So for the kashrus of the esrog mitzvah, there are other conditions which you don't have with chiyuv maisa, right? Therefore, although Rabbi Kiva holds Esrog Abayse is not considered a fruit, and therefore it's possible a mitzvah, it could be a Chaim Maisa, because for Chaim Maisa you don't need the same conditions. HaChayiv Ishkedim, when they're at a level where they're Chayiv with the almonds, the potter for the sweet ones, potter for the bitter ones, and the other way around. So these some type of bitter, sometimes are sweet, and they become edible at various times. Now what's Chayiv Minzeh is potter of Minzeh. We didn't explain what level of growth we're talking about. HaChayiv Ishkedim Amorim potter b'Psukim, when they're liable with the bitter ones, they're potter with the sweet ones. Ketanim, when they're small. Small bitter ones can only be eaten when they're small. They're not so bitter. So Chaim Maisa. And the sweet ones are better when they're bigger. So they can't be eaten when they're small and potter from Maisa. Achayim Masukim potter from Morim. When the liability with the sweet ones is potter with the bitter ones. Okay, that is good idea when they are bigger. Tari Rishmael Rabbi Yossi Mishum Aviv. Shekedim Amorim Harelu Paturin. The bitter almonds, they are potter completely from Maisrus, right? Whether they're big, whether they are small. The sweet ones, they're not liable until you take off their outer shell. Okay. Hayri Rav Chanina b'tzipari paskin hadod Rishmon Rabbi Yossi, like this did. But Mehari, how did he paskin? Like the bitter almonds or the sweet almonds? Tzipari Amri, they said he paskin b'marim with the bitter ones. That they're what? They're potter from ice, small or big. Rav Zeir Amri, he said b'mesukim. Talking about the sweet ones, they're potter from Maisrus until they have this outer shell. Rabbi Yechon said, the bitter ones, which were in the beginning in Sipori, and they were potter, like the men in Sipori, if afterwards Yodilakad, imagine they went to Tiberia now, where Rabbi Yechon was, this Chayva Maisrus, they are now liable for Maisrus. But if after that, after they came here, and they were obligated, they went again to Sipori, Kwan Nifter, they are potter when they're in Sipori, and therefore, even when they go back now to there, they completely maintain their existing patur. Okay. Now, what about the din of Rabbi Yossi that the sweet almonds are potter from Maisrus until this shell forms, this green shell? He paskin about the sweet almonds that are in the box. What's this? Kimin Shara, when you see, let's say in a box, Shlosha Shapir, 3 almonds, their outer shell has come off. At that stage, you assume they're all ripe, and you can take truma for the whole lot, although you can't see a simon of this shell. You shouldn't take truma of one lot of almonds for another lot of almonds. Okay, to be continued, Rabbi Say.